whenever we follow Jesus, he flips everything we thought we understood on its head. He turns everything upside down. And he reveals to the human soul these empty places we go to try and find success, to try and be great. And he exposes them for the facade that they are.
Hey everyone, welcome to the CLC Commute. My name's Afsana, this is Grant, and we are doing a deeper dive of our Sunday sermons, and hopefully we can give it to you in a package where you can listen to it maybe on your daily commute, maybe while you're just getting things done around the house. But again, we hope that this shouldn't just give you a bit of a glimpse into the message of the week. And so we are continuing in a sermon series leading up to Easter called The Journey to the Cross. And we've kind of been diving into Jesus's journey with his disciples as he's leading them really to this place of his death, burial, and resurrection. And Grant, you started this message, The Secret to Greatness, by sharing a little bit of a personal story about how you had a plan for your life, but God had different plans, something that I think most of us can in some way relate to. And so kind of paint this picture for us of this journey that really God's taken you on over the past decade.
Yeah. And so, I started off by just simply sharing my journey. This is my testimony, okay? We all have stories. We all have journeys that God is taking us on. But for me, my plan for my life was to go to optometry school. Had my eye on that for many years. And I was about a month away from moving to Memphis, Tennessee to go to optometry school. And the Lord began to remind me of something that he had spoken to my heart years prior. And as I began to reflect on that, I really felt like the Lord was inviting me into a place that it wasn't clear where he was leading me, but I just knew that he was inviting me into a different story. And so the joke that I say with people, but Jesus made me an optometry school dropout, right?
Well, and that was not an easy decision by any means. We had just met at the time, and I just remember how difficult and how confusing it was, not just to you, but to the people in your life, your family, your close friends. Like, why in the world would God lead you in a different direction?
Confusing on the outside, but it was a deeply clarifying decision in my soul.
Yeah.
Because for the first time, it felt like I was following an invitation that the Lord had extended to me, and he was leading me into a life where I didn't control everything. I didn't make the call on everything, and it's been beautiful to see his hand continue to lead and provide every step of the way.
So how would you say that act of surrender, which again was a huge decision? I mean, you had spent the majority of your college career building to this moment just to walk away from it weeks before you were supposed to move. I mean, this was a really intense decision to make. What was that act of surrender like in the sense of learning about what true success and quote, greatness is, as you talked about in your message?
Yeah. There's a way to live a life of faith where we can keep things nice and neat and control everything. But whenever we truly do, what I have learned is whenever we truly do say yes to Jesus and we follow him wherever he may lead, and I'm not saying I do this perfectly. I still stumble every day. But whenever we follow him, I can truly look back over the last 4,562 days.
Not that you're counting. Yeah.
And it's pretty accurate. Not that I count every day, but and I can say that everything that I have, every opportunity I've been given, was given to me by him, not because of my own doing, my own intelligence, my own ability. And there's a lot of freedom that comes with that because,
that's a very humbling experience, right?
Right. And I think where I connected it with the message and kind of the thought of greatness, which is where we went in the sermon on Sunday, is whenever we follow Jesus, he flips everything we thought we understood on its head. He turns everything upside down. And he reveals to the human soul these empty places we go to try and find success, to try and be great, and he exposes them for the facade that they are.
Yeah.
And I talked about what people say about us, what we have, what we accomplish. Those are all things that I think many people can identify with, places that we go, things that we pursue that really are eternally, they don't count for much.
Yeah.
And if we follow Jesus, he leads us into this deeper expression of what it means to truly live a life of faith.
Well, and you tied it into obviously the portion in the scripture where the disciples are having this discussion, right? And they're kind of whispering to one another and trying to figure out who among them is the greatest, right? And what their seat of honor will be in the kingdom. And Jesus, takes note of what they're saying and confronts the issue.
Right.
And so can you just kind of give us a glimpse into just this narrative in the scripture that you use, but also why it's so real for us, because we do that, right? We kind of rank ourselves amongst our peers and amongst those in our communities, even if it's kind of a subconscious thing. We are all kind of guilty of that. But kind of paint this narrative that you shared and what Jesus kind of leads us into and leads the disciples into from that discussion of who is the greatest among us.
This upcoming Sunday is Palm Sunday. And in the narrative, whenever you read it in Matthew chapter 18, 19, 20, in Matthew 21, that's where we enter into Jerusalem, Jesus' triumphal entry. 3 chapters prior, we see the rumblings amongst the disciples that they're starting to argue with one another about what true greatness is. And just as you said, their definitions of greatness, their ideations of greatness, their pictures of what this was going to look like whenever Jesus goes into Jerusalem, as he thought, they literally thought Jesus was going to ride into Jerusalem, kick out all the Romans, and begin to establish his kingdom, which they had earthly imaginations of what this kingdom would look like.
They were making sense. They're trying to sense make of what was happening, what was to come.
They had looked around their entire life that, the people who are powerful are the ones who get ahead in life. The people who have more money are the ones that have the honored seats. This is the world we live in, right?
Yeah.
And they were trying to make sense of Christ's message, messianic kingdom, in light of what they had seen. And they began to, from that paradigm, begin to argue with one another who gets the seat of honor at the right and the left of Jesus whenever he comes and kicks the Romans out.
Yeah.
And Jesus heard them talking, and I think he took advantage of a teaching moment. He said, "Guys, what are you talking about?" And they got super silent because they were caught.
Yeah.
Right? And
they were exposed.
They were exposed. But before we get really, negative and critical of the disciples and be like, "Oh my goodness, disciples, what were you doing? You were walking with Jesus for 3 years. Surely you could have figured it out." We do the same thing, I think, at times, in that we tend to, this is just human tendency, to create these artificial ranking systems on all these different labels: ethnicity, race, gender, class, socioeconomics. I can keep on going. And then we position ourselves on these social ladders.
Yeah.
And
even the word great, greatness, we it may even be hard for us to relate to that word. I mean, I think it's just success. How do we measure success? And you even asked that question directly to us, of being honest with ourselves, of what metric do we use when we're measuring self-greatness or self-success or any of these things, right? So again, we all subconsciously, even if we're not aware, we do that.
Right.
And so as you're continuing, with the disciples, as they're going.
They were doing the same thing. I mean, we all have the tendency to do that. But I led us to ask a more important question. A more important question, if we're truly seeking to follow Jesus, is not how do we define success or greatness, but how does Jesus define greatness?
Yes.
And it led us all the way up into this really interesting encounter between James and John's mom and Jesus. And in that, he begins to uncover and reveal what true greatness really is.
Yeah. And so your first point, which I thought was hilarious and something that I think, again, we can all relate to, was don't hide behind your mama.
Sure.
And so can you break that down for us and what that means on kind of a more broad scope?
Sure. Zebedee's wife, James and John's mom, comes to Jesus. "Can my sons have seats of honor at your right and left?" what good mom? I mean, any good mama would want that for their sons. I mean,
Right.
but Jesus, knowing that they knew better, he doesn't address mom. He actually turns and addresses James and John. And we see this play out in the text in Matthew chapter 20. And he asks, he looks at them and says, "Can you drink this cup of suffering that I'm about to endure?" And they said, we can do this. We can do this. And the point that I was trying to make is they were hiding behind the request of their mama. We as human beings have the tendency to hide behind other people, whether it be in our own spiritual journeys or taking not taking responsibility for the things in our life. And I just simply made the point: greatness begins where personal responsibility is taken.
Yeah.
We have to understand that we are held accountable in the end. For us, for me and me alone. Mm-hmm. And I think until we understand that we can't hide behind someone else, but that we have to take personal responsibility for our thoughts, actions, intentions, attitudes, that is the point where Jesus is great. A Jesus-shaped greatness begins to emerge.
Yeah, and I think there is a temptation, whether it is, a parent or maybe it's a spouse that we view as a little bit more spiritual than us or whatever. We tend to hide behind other people's faith even. And I think that was such a humbling message for us to consider of at the end of the day, we will stand before the Lord and give an account for our own life.
Yeah.
And what a powerful thing to sit on and to meditate on and to just take responsibility for.
Yeah.
And, as you continue to lead us in these different points that I think Jesus teaches us, you talked a lot about even our integrity, right? And what we do with power and authority and how we treat others whenever we do we are given some type of authority.
Yeah. Yeah. Jesus is trying to make the point that, again, Jesus speaking, Jesus' kingdom is fundamentally different than what we've seen in the world. And so whenever we enter into a relationship with him, a lot of times we're having to unlearn some unhealthy things that we've seen modeled in our homes, in our jobs, in our communities, because the world tends to use power for personal gain. And we don't have to think hard and long about someone in our life or an example we've seen of when power was used for personal gain. But Jesus says that's how they do it. Yeah. But he says this really powerful line in the NLT, the New Living Translation. He says, "Among you, it will be different. Among you, it will be different." And here's how it's going to be different. Rather than using power to get a leg up in life, we use the power, the authority, the influence that God has entrusted to us to help other people. That is a fundamental mindset shift in the kingdom of God. Much easier said than done. It sounds like a great platitude, but if we learn to live a life that Jesus is inviting us into, where we don't use whatever we've been given to line our own pockets, but to help someone else get ahead, man, there is a principle of greatness.
And you even ask this question of ourselves whenever we go into situations. Instead of asking this question, and you can correct me if if you said it differently, but instead of asking, "What can I get out of this?" What was the question you said we should be asking in situations?
How can I help others?
How can I help others? And that's this way of Jesus coming in and flipping the narrative. You're looking to find greatness within yourself. You're looking to gain that seat of honor. But what are you doing to actually serve those around you?
When you help others win, you win.
Yeah.
That's what Jesus is trying to help us to understand. Because if you view life as this zero-sum game, then I'm in a constant competition with other people. But if we view life through a kingdom perspective where I help others win and then everyone wins, that whenever you get ahead and that I get blessed, that we are connected, as Dr. MLK says, that in this interconnected mutuality, I think is the term that he says, an inescapable network of mutuality. We may have heard that quote from Dr. MLK. And he makes this really profound statement. In South Africa, they have this because we lived there for 3 years, they have this term. And it comes from the Zulu word Ubuntu. And just simply translated, It's this. I am because we are.
Yeah.
And I think we have a lot to learn.
What is it within
Yeah.
us that feels this need for, maybe it's competition, or like, why do we feel this sense of we can't all win?
Yeah. I think it's because the world is constantly trying to pull us into these basic instincts. The New Testament calls them these elementary principles, which is a mentality based in scarcity and fear.
Yeah.
And I think if we operate within scarcity and fear, then we have the tendency to see someone else as someone to compete with, rather than the kingdom invites us into a place of abundance and faith.
Yeah.
Which is because my Father loves me, there's more where that came from.
Yeah.
And faith, I can trust him. Then we begin to operate and move through the world and build relationships with people that are just fundamentally different.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, whenever I take a moment to think of the people who've poured into my life, and thank goodness there wasn't this feeling of, oh, I can't invest in her because X, Y, and Z, or there's a insecurity or a competition, but the people that I've invested in my life because they wanted to see me be successful, or they want to see me grow. And what a gift those people are to our lives that are willing to pour into us because they don't feel that sense of competition. And for us to be able to do that for one another,
Yes.
I think is what Jesus is saying. Wow, that's true greatness.
Yes.
And you know, as you talked about this, I don't want to skip over this. I know we don't have a lot more time left, but you had talked about seasons of pain and suffering, and I feel like this could be a great way for us to close out this conversation of the gift that can come through those seasons of pain and suffering that can actually lead us to those seasons of what Jesus would call as great. Can you just touch on that and give us kind of a final encouragement? Maybe we are seeing ourselves in a season that's difficult.
Yeah.
What can we learn from those times in helping us get toward Jesus?
Seasons of pain, trouble, suffering, and I made this comment, I don't wish them upon my worst enemy. You know, when I think back to my own seasons of pain and suffering, I don't want to go back.
Yeah.
But I think this is pretty universally true to those who are walking with Christ through the pain, is that if we're really honest, there was a nearness of the Lord's presence that was only fully known in that way in that season of hardship. And I think it teaches us something about the character and the nature of our God, is that he is near to the brokenhearted. He desires to comfort those who are in need of comfort. And I think that's true because, and as we're about to talk about in the Easter season, Jesus fully identified with humanity as he was hanging on that cross, expressing self-sacrifice. And because he's felt the human pain, the sting of death, he's able to follow us all the way to the place of death. But here's the hope of Easter. If we're willing to walk with Jesus, fellowship with him in the pain, in the suffering, all the way to the point of the cross, you know, I don't know what that cross is for us, for you and for me, for you.
Yeah.
But here's the hope of Easter. The hope of Easter is that there is something we learn about the Lord's character as we fellowship with him in that pain. There's an intimacy, there's a knowing that we encounter. And we can also rest assured that he desires to bring forth life, hope, newness out of dead places.
Yes.
And that is the hope of the resurrection message and story. And so I guess that's an invitation, is if you're in a season of pain or suffering, let this be a season where you get to know Christ in an intimate way because he desires to reveal himself to you in those places. And then keep walking through him all the way through the valley, because there's light on the other side.
There's light on the other side. Resurrection is coming.
Yeah.
And typically in those seasons of resurrection in our own life, we gain a new perspective, even an empathy for those that we are called to serve.
Yes.
And I love that kind of ties us back into that greatness. I think you even said this in your message. Greatness serves.
Greatness serves. That's it.
And
That's the secret.
And so
The secret's out.
as our encouragement to you this week, and really as we continue in the Easter season, is that we would look to serve like Jesus and love like he did, and go on the journey wherever he may be leading us.
Yes.
And so, again, we hope this encouraged you. Feel free to to share with a friend, to do a deeper dive in our sermon study guide that's linked in the description. And we're excited to be heading into Palm Sunday and Easter, and we hope to continue to engage with you then. But you guys have an amazing week, and we'll see you next time.